Space exploration was once the domain of the Cold War superpowers. But in the 21st century, there is an exclusive club of nations with successful space programs. And its latest member is India.
We have started our journey to the moon.
Having achieved multiple successful space missions, India is taking a front seat in a new space race, with journeys to the moon, Mars, and beyond.
ISRO is a living example of India's independence or search for independence in a very high technology arena. ISRO has done more with less.
Then we started building our own satellites. And then we had to have our own launchers. It is to make India self-reliant.
The story of India's space program has been one of overcoming great adversity with limited resources.
We had to use bicycles and bullock carts for carrying the rockets instruments.
And a backdrop of tumultuous global politics.
There were conspiracy theories. Perhaps the CIA was the kind of favorite candidate for conspiracy theorists.
From the first Indian in space to its own human spaceflight program.
The Indian space program is a unique program. It does not have any parallel anywhere else in the world.
India, with a space program built painstakingly over 6 decades, is poised to become one of the leaders in the quest to explore space.
What if I told you that India's journey to the space wasn't charted in the high-tech labs of the world's most advanced nations? Instead, it was charted in the hearts of a few determined visionaries. These visionaries had no cutting-edge technology, they had no sophisticated infrastructure, but they possessed something far more powerful, a dream to place India among the stars. The year was 1963. On the quiet sandy shores of Thumba, Kerala, where the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and the rhythm of waves, a revolution was brewing. This was no ordinary place. The magnetic equator passes through it, making it the best place on Earth for studying cosmic rays. And it was where a visionary named Dr. Vikram Sarabhai saw the future. A future where India, still young and struggling to find its footing, would reach for the space. Sarabhai was more than a scientist. He was a dreamer, a man who saw beyond the limitations of his time.
The space race was more than just a contest of technological prowess. It was a symbol of ideological superiority. He envisioned a space program
that would not be about domination or prestige, but about lifting a nation out of poverty, about solving the problems that plagued millions. It was an idea so audacious, so daring.
48-year-old Homi Bhabha, an outstanding nuclear physicist, and 38-year-old Vikram Sarabhai, a physicist and astronomer.
During World War II, both of them happened to be kind of stranded in India. So it's kind of interesting because then one went on to found the Atomic Energy Commission and the other went on to found the space program.
They were extremely bright and energetic scientists who understood the science and the technology of what was required to launch a space program. They were really invested in nation building within India. They were known among very elite scientific networks globally. So all of this together made it possible for Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha to really create the program.
India's chief space scientist, Vikram Sarabhai, identifies a sleepy fishing village, Thumba, in Kerala just below the magnetic equator as the country's first rocket launching site.
On those very shores of Thumba, a small church was converted into India's first space laboratory.
So there was this church It was not very large, and it was kind of open to the elements, and you had pigeons roosting upstairs. The great big space program was really kind of birthed in this little space.
INCOSPAR, the Indian Committee for Space Research, which they formed in the early 1960s. And the architects of that really were Baba and Sarabhai, who really pushed this initiative at every level in terms of investment and infrastructure.
NASA also is in the mode of inspiring the entire world with the space program. So here, when Indian scientists and researchers approached NASA, through this connection and collaboration that Dr. Sarabhai started, NASA gave the sounding rocket.
Dr. Madhavan Nair has worked for ISRO for over half a century. He played an integral role in the development of India's rocket program and rose to head ISRO as its chairman. Under his leadership, India orbited the moon in its very first attempt, and the ambitious Gaganyaan mission was announced. He was part of the early team at Tumba.
We were not having the luxury of many vehicles, but these rockets, it cannot be carried in a motor vehicle with the sparks. So this Nike Apache rocket, which came from NASA, it is removed out of the container, and we had used a bullock cart for rolling it from the assembly bay to the launch pad. Then of course the payload which is required for it is again not so big. So we have used a bicycle, and one of our scientists was riding the bicycle and carrying it all the way.
In November 1963, as the first sounding rocket roared into the sky, a new era dawned for India. The launch was modest, almost humble, but it marked the birth of what would become the Indian Space Research Organisation, ISRO. From this point on, India's journey into space was no longer a distant dream. It was a mission, a promise to the future. The Satellite Launch Vehicle, or SLV, was India's first attempt to launch a satellite from its own soil. The mission director, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam,
Sir, we are not ready, sir. Bypass system, we'll launch. Sir.
Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam faced a critical moment when the computer systems indicated a potential issue. Trusting his own calculations over the machines, he made a decision that ultimately proved incorrect.
I bypassed the computer, I launched the system. It went to spin. Instead of putting the satellite in the orbit, it put in the Bay of Bengal.
Dr. Kalam, over the intercom, announced that there is a failure of the mission. I went there. It was really heartbreaking sight. The entire launch pad was flooded with a yellowish fluid. That was the oxidizer which was required for the control system. Our judgment at the time, the gas has leaked, is not correct.
So at that time, a great man, a great leader, Professor Satish Dhawan, he comes to me, I'm very tired working nearly for months. He wakes me up, come, let us go for a press conference. I was really frightened, I will be the culprit because I'm the project director, mission director. Media asked, you have put Bay of Bengal so many crores, you have put it like that, lot of criticism. So he took the whole blame himself, received the criticism. He assured them in a year we will succeed with our team, it's a very good team.
As good as Dhawan's word and broadcast live across the country, on July 18, 1980, SLV-3 lifts off from Sriharikota to place a satellite in orbit.
The next year, July 18, 1980, when he succeeded, Professor Dhawan said, you go and conduct the press conference. Do you follow what this means? It means when the failure occurred, the leader took it up. When the success came, he gives to his team.
The mission's success makes India the 6th nation capable of launching satellites. In 1994, India's 3rd-generation rocket launches the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, or the PSLV. The PSLV has gone on to become the workhorse of ISRO's satellite launch program. It has a record of 51 out of 53 successful launches.
It has over a 95% success rate, one of the highest actually for any operational launch vehicle globally. It's an incredible success for India, and more recently it has been launching satellites for other countries.
Everything you imagine PSLV has done, whether PSLV was meant for low Earth orbit. PSLV took the satellites to the geosynchronous orbit, that is 36,000 kilometers. And PSLV took a satellite to Moon. PSLV took a satellite to Mars.
ISRO's rise to prominence can be largely attributed to the visionary leadership of Professor Satish Dhawan. After the untimely death of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai in 1972, Dhawan took command of ISRO, determined to prepare India for a future where space was the next frontier. He was instrumental in the development of high-capacity satellites and indigenous launchers. Under his leadership, India designed the SLV and PSLV and successfully launched its first satellite, Aryabhata. Now, with a legacy of success behind it, India is aiming for the moon and beyond. As a former ISRO scientist once said, Sarabhai is the founder, but Dhawan is the guiding light. This quote perfectly encapsulates the crucial role both leaders played in shaping India's space journey.
Led by dynamic scientists, India sets off on a daring mission to the moon and a new era of exploration.
It's a historic moment. We have started our journey to the moon.
Indian scientists wait nervously as the spacecraft attempts to enter the moon's orbit. Just one technical glitch, and the whole mission could end in disaster. And then, the signal they were waiting for. India becomes only the 5th nation to orbit the moon.
Put all the 4 spacecraft into the intended orbit.
Once in the lunar orbit, Chandrayaan 1's terrain mapping camera produces more than 70,000 three-dimensional images.
Chandrayaan 1 was one of the great missions. It was ISRO's generosity that when they were thinking about this mission, they also invited other agencies, other nations. Out of 11, there were 5 that were from India, ISRO. And the other instruments came from the US, the UK, all over the world. Everybody got excited.
This mission confirms the presence of water and ice on the moon for the very first time. It's a great milestone for the world.
We designed a special capsule with Indian flag on board. That was deposited on the surface of the moon as a permanent mark.
One may evaluate this mission, of the first really Indian deep space mission, as an incredible success. One has to really admire both the innovation involved and the ambition involved, partly because this was moving away from Vikram Sarabhai's original vision of India's space program, essentially directed towards Indian development, but moving to a new vision of Indian space exploration, which is looking outward and beyond into more ambitious projects to the planets.
Spurred on by its success on the moon, India's stalwart scientists set their sights further, this time to Mars.
भारतीय अंतरिक्ष विज्ञान के इतिहास में एक स्वर्णिम इतिहास रचने जा रहा है।
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Very fantastic.
Scientists who've worked for over a decade on this mission are closely monitoring operations. The Mars orbiter they built has traveled to the Red Planet, about 54 million kilometers away, and now has to make the tricky maneuver into its orbit. In September 2014, navigated by scientists in Bengaluru, Mangalyaan successfully enters Mars's orbit. The first set of Mars pictures sent from the orbiter stream into ISRO headquarters. It makes India the first nation to succeed on its maiden attempt to reach Mars, and just the fourth space agency in the world to reach the Mars orbit. Its trip to the Red Planet cost less than the Hollywood film Gravity.
So ISRO had a lot of systems at hand and a lot of technologies, having learned from the Chandrayaan-1 mission. And the fact that we used the PSLV might have taken us longer to reach Mars, but what it did was it cut down cost by quite a bit.
This really puts India in a very rarefied club, and I think this particular mission shows a kind of ambition, sophistication, and the possible future of India's space program, with further missions planned, perhaps to Venus and the Moon certainly, but also the other planets too.
Indian space scientists seem unstoppable with a string of successes, but failure is an expected part of any scientist's journey. India launched their second moon mission, Chandrayaan-2. It is a test for India's most powerful rocket to date, the GSLV Mark III. On board is a fully indigenous orbiter, lander, and rover. "29 days after launch, the Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft enters the lunar orbit. But now the real test for India's space scientists begins. Through a complex series of braking maneuvers, ISRO will try and land the Vikram lander on the Moon's south polar region.
It was called the 7 minutes of terror, even before the landing, the descent actually began.
For some reason, the lander starts to deviate from its intended trajectory at an altitude of 2 kilometers. It is the first sign of trouble. ISRO then loses communication just when touchdown confirmation is due.
Does it mean lander orbital communication is on?
Rather than a soft landing, the Vikram lander crash lands hard onto the moon's surface. ISRO's hopes are dashed. The mission is a failure.
Imagine Michael Schumacher in an F1 car and he's going at X speed, and then he applies brakes at the wrong time or for longer than it's required, and what happens to the car, right? That is exactly what happened to the lander.
Important lessons are learned. Scientists now know the GSLV Mark III, so long in development, had launched successfully. It can now be developed to carry humans into space. But the nature of space exploration is changing.
India is arriving at a new stage of its space program where it is now offering its services to other countries who can't launch their own satellites. So it's a very, very competitive market internationally because they're competing now with the Europeans, the Chinese, and so on and so forth.
The next few years are going to be very, very exciting when you speak of space tech. India has just about opened up its space sector, and a lot of private sector companies are now looking at launch vehicles, satellites, and satellite-based applications. A lot of them are in fact very, very exciting, and India right now account for about 3% of global space tech industry, which we hope to grow in double digits.
From its humble beginnings in a church in Tumba, India has grown into a world space superpower. New collaborations are planned with Japan, Russia, NASA, and the European Space Agency. India-US space collaboration will be strengthened with ISRO, one of the world's most sophisticated satellites that is scheduled for launch from Sriharikota, India.
We are flying a satellite that is one of the largest Earth-orbiting satellites that has ever flown, and deploys almost like a ballet dancer. So it's really a beautiful thing to see. So you can think of NISAR as providing weekly coverage of the Earth. We also measure sea ice and mountain glaciers, in the Himalayas in particular. And we are trying to understand the inventory of ice, how it's changing, what that means for water storage and water usage, as well as climate.
I joined as a spacecraft test engineer at the time. That was a great opportunity for me because I had a direct interface with the satellite, and we had interaction with all the designers, subsystem designers, mission designers. And there was a lot of exchange of ideas and understanding. It was a wonderful time actually. The INSAT-1 series was supposed to operationalize all the communication requirements like telecom, broadcasting and all those applications, and weather monitoring also. It was a huge time for expansion.
What ISRO's men and women do has a transformative impact on the lives of Indians. Satellite TV is made possible by ISRO satellites. Fishermen get cyclone warnings days in advance, and search and rescue missions are made possible. Farmers get information about the monsoon to help plan their sowing cycle.
Even the digital news gathering systems are using the satellite for these things. So at an instant, the information which passes, information is the power really to include
Indian space scientists have taken Vikram Sarabhai's vision to spectacular heights and expanded it to chase interplanetary missions. Sending humans on manned space flights 4 decades on, India is developing its own human spaceflight mission, Gaganyaan, to put Indians into space.
अब हम मानव सहित गगनयान लेकर के चलेंगे। विश्व के अंदर हम चौथे देश बन जाएंगे जो मानव को अंतरिक्ष में पहुंचाने वाले बन जाएंगे।
Our path for the human presence in Moon or Mars is really going to be the aim for long-term future. Maybe 35, 40, that time frame, we will be also going to these places on our own.
Gaganyaan is ISRO's most ambitious space mission in its 60-year history. The stakes are bigger than ever. With each mission, India expands her presence in space, strengthening her position as a pioneer and a leader in humankind's space odyssey.
पूरे दर्शक दीर्घा यहाँ बहुत उत्साहित। ऑटोमेटिक लॉन्च सीक्वेंस जारी है।
All sequences down. Advert and wheel will be open.
Real-time program activated. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff normal.
आसमान को घेरते हुए अपनी भयानक दहाड़ से चारों ओर कंपन उत्पन्न कर रहा है। चंद्रमा की सतह पर अपना छाप छोड़ने के लिए चंद्रयान 3 अपने मिशन को पूरा करने निकल चुका है।
तू होकर बेफिक्र रख ऊंचा अपना सर, मिशन को मन में रख के कसम से